Astrology. I hope you're all doing well, staying healthy, staying safe. Welcome to another video. Today I want to talk about some ways that using astrology can be really beneficial in your life and some ways that it can actually not be so beneficial. And just as a disclaimer, these are all my thoughts based on what I've experienced. I've been studying astrology for over 3 years now, like 3.5 maybe. And I've fluctuated between obsessing over astrology, tracking every single transit, like exactly what time the moon is going to change signs. And then I've been on the other end of the spectrum of not really paying attention to the transits, not really paying attention to long-term patterns, etc. So in this video, I want to talk about ways that we can use astrology that's really helpful for us, good ways to use astrology, if you will, and then ways of using astrology that I've seen and I've personally done that are misuse of this wonderful tool that we're passionate about. So if you guys like this video, please give me a thumbs up, comment down below, and subscribe so you can see more videos from me in the future. And let's dive on in. So starting off with some ways that astrology can be really beneficial. First of all, astrology is a tool for introspection and self-development. And I think that those go well together and it's too hard to split them up, so I'm just gonna cover them as one topic. Astrology gives us a deeper insight into ourselves. And I'm talking about natal astrology here, obviously. If you know what your birth chart looks like, you can learn things about yourself, or maybe even just put things into words that you felt but didn't realize were unique to you. I remember when I first got into astrology and I learned about my Aquarius moon, I was like, this makes so much sense. Like everything just clicked. And also around that time, I sent my grandma, who also has an Aquarius moon, a mini chart reading. And she replied and she said, you touch on things that I didn't think anyone else knew about me. Using archetypes and stereotypes and, personality types, I guess, astrology can help put into words what we feel but may not necessarily know. And then going off of this, once we've kind of learned more about our personalities, more about how we operate, maybe how we communicate, how we show love and affection, how we process our emotions, we have the opportunity to use those for self-development. But generally speaking, astrology is a really great tool for self-development because taking each individual placement and seeing how they work together, you can really dive deep into the dark sides of your personality and the good sides and kind of boost up those good sides, let's say you have a Leo sun because it's Leo season. Really play up your confidence, really play up your social and charming nature, but then also learn to balance out your insecurities, the dark sides of Leo, like the insecurity, the overly arrogant nature, balance those out and learn to work through those. Self-development is really important, and I'm personally always on the quest to developing myself and learning more and being the best version of myself, and astrology has been an essential tool. I can't speak highly enough about how much I've learned about myself and how much I continue to learn about myself through the study of astrology. Kind of going along that same point, astrology is really good to learn about others. As someone with absolutely no placements in water signs in my birth chart, as I was studying astrology, this is one of those examples where as I learn more astrology, I learn more about others, and then I learn more about astrology and etc. And it's a really nice loop. I had always read, oh, water signs just feel things and they can make decisions based off of that. And as someone with a lot of planets in Capricorn, I'm like, where is the logic? Where is the thinking process? Can we go about this practically? And recently I was talking to one of my friends who has a Cancer sun and moon, and she was like, yeah, I just have to go with what feels right. If this person feels right, I'll go with that relationship. If this situation feels right, I'll go with that situation. But if it doesn't feel right, I'm not going to go with it. And I was like, oh my God, what's it like to be inside a water sign's head? It was just so interesting to me to see astrology and play like that. And then knowing her placements, it helped make even more sense. I hope that all makes sense. Basically, my first 2 points that are kind of 3 and all kind of one and the same. Ultimately, astrology can be used in the same way that you can use Myers-Briggs, you can use the Enneagram, you can use any personality test that kind of pulls out certain characteristics and places you into certain types. Astrology obviously goes much deeper than that because rather than being placed into 16 types like Myers-Briggs or 9 types like the Enneagram, although the Enneagram goes deeper and there are subtypes and wings, etc. Those ones are very much, it's just you have one type with a subtype and a wing. With Myers-Briggs, you just have your type. Personally, out of all of the personality types out there, I like astrology the best, simply because if you're like me and you use the 5 traditional visible planets plus the 2, like the sun and the moon, the 2 luminaries, you get 7 planets in 12 different signs. And I can't do math off the top of my head, but there are a lot of combinations in there, a lot of possibilities for different nuances, and the way that everything is broken up, like you can explore just Mercury, and you can explore your communication style or your learning style. I've learned so much about how I learn and how others learn through studying the Mercury signs. And that's just one of the 7 planets. There's so much to go into. There's so much to learn about yourself and so much to learn about others through astrology. It is an incredible tool to dive deep within yourself, fully understand other people better, and also figure out how you can become the best version of yourself using the planets in your birth chart to figure out where your weaknesses are, where your shadow side is, and working through that. Next on my list of ways to use astrology in a positive or beneficial or good way is tracking patterns. This can be done through transits. This can be done through ancient Time Lord techniques. If you study the Hellenistic tradition like I do, you have annual perfections, which is something I think is kind of coming into modern astrology, like circles, whatever, more right now. There are ways to use astrology to track patterns. There's also Time Lord techniques. Annual perfections is the most popular one, but there's also zodiacal releasing, which I know about this much about, and it's a really in-depth topic, so I'm not even gonna pretend like I know enough to talk about it right here. But that's another way to track patterns for your individual personal life. And then the final way to track patterns is through transits, which is what is happening in the sky at any given moment. For example, right now, the sun is in Leo and Mercury just moved into Leo. So for me, that's my 12th house. So 12th house themes are going to be a little bit more prominent for me during Leo season. And so I can allow the sun to kind of illuminate that area of my life. I can use Mercury to try and communicate the secrets, the isolation, which we're all experiencing right now. But the other 12th house themes, I can use Mercury moving through that house to kind of try and get in touch with that side, become more comfortable with the unknown, or like the depths of myself, etc. So with the tracking patterns, you can use transits and Time Lord techniques to kind of track patterns in your life. For example, I know that every single Pisces season, I just get really emotional. My Aquarius moon does not love Pisces season. I find myself being much more sensitive. And so I just know that every Pisces season is going to be very similar in some ways. Versus I know that every Taurus season, I seem to go through this intense period of growth because that's my 9th house. So basically what I'm getting at here is using astrology to track the patterns and kind of observe different seasons of your life is a really helpful way to do it. Another benefit to tracking patterns in astrology is that you are more able to work with the energy of the universe and work with the cycles of nature rather than working against them. So going back to my example of Pisces season, for me personally, knowing that Pisces season brings up a lot of emotions, that's not the time for me to be starting on big projects. That's a kind of a time to hunker down, reflect a little bit more, chill out, and then when Aries season comes, that's when I can start working on new things. And then the final way that I think astrology can be used in a really beneficial way is for predictions. Once you have a good grasp on how patterns can be tracked using astrology, you can use that to do predictive work. For example, if Mars is transiting your first house, you can predict that period, however long Mars is going to be there, is going to be a time where you will feel more confident, more aggressive. You're going to feel more emboldened, but also more competitive. And being aware of that and maybe planning things a certain way. Maybe that's the month or several months that you want to start a new fitness routine because Mars is very physical, very visceral. That could be a really good opportunity for you to make some changes to your physical body. And predictions, of course, can be used as a personal tool. It can also be used for mundane astrology. And if you don't know, mundane astrology is basically the astrology of world events, like day-to-day things that are happening on a grander scale. And that's an entire field of study on its own. Most people study natal astrology. I'm sure if you're watching this video, you know something about astrology, but your knowledge is definitely in the context of a natal chart. And certain placements or traits or significations that we would ascribe to certain planets when they appear in a natal chart or transits in relation to a natal chart, those are very different, or at least slightly different from the significations of mundane astrology. So we might view a Mars-Saturn conjunction one way in a natal chart, but in a mundane chart it signifies very different things because it's not about a single person, it's about the world on a larger scale, if that makes sense. But astrology can be used as a predictive tool for mundane astrology, and as I mentioned, it can be used in your natal chart. And this is definitely in relation to the tracking of patterns. If you know astrology well enough to track patterns and recognize and kind of process how certain transits or time periods have manifested in your chart or in the charts of others in the past, you can use that to predict the future. So I think I've covered most of the ways that astrology can be used in a beneficial way. I think that it's a really amazing tool for self-development, for introspection, getting to know yourself better, getting to know others better. It's also really good for tracking patterns in your life, which can fall under like the getting to know yourself better, but tracking patterns on a larger scale, and then also using it for predictions to an extent, which I'll get to later. But I think that astrology is such a wonderful tool for so many reasons. Those are the main reasons that I personally use astrology. If there are any more that I forgot, let me know down in the comments. But astrology can be used in such a positive and beneficial way. And if nothing else, it's just really interesting to learn about. And so I think for some people, astrology is really beneficial in their lives because it gives them a hobby and a passion and something that they are interested to do every day. All right, so now let's get into some ways that astrology shouldn't be used or ways that astrology can actually be very harmful. So the first way that I think astrology can be harmful is the exact opposite of what I said earlier about predictions and tracking cycles. When I first started studying astrology, I downloaded the Time Passages app and I would check it religiously. I was just always checking every single planetary movement down to the minute. Like, what degree is the moon at right now? And then an hour later, what degree is the moon at now? And obsessing over it. And I think I've gotten to a point where I can balance tracking the patterns and the cycles and transits of what's going on in the sky without obsessing over it. But I think that it's really easy, especially when you're new to astrology, to slip into that obsession and constantly knowing exactly where all the planets are. Because ultimately, yes, it's important to track the cycles of the planets. That's one of the biggest benefits of astrology, is understanding what the planets are doing at any given moment. At the same time, if you miss a transit, or if it's, flies under your radar, the transit's still going to happen. It's still going to correlate with the energy that you are feeling at that moment, regardless of whether you remember it happened or not. It's not the end of the world if you miss a full moon. It's not the end of the world if you forget that Mercury moved into Leo yesterday. It still happened, and if you're studying astrology and you're aware of these changes, you're still going to feel a change anyway. And if you don't, that's okay too, because astrology shouldn't consume your life. I think that astrology is a wonderful passion and an amazing hobby, and it's one of the things I'm most passionate about. And at the same time, there's a fine line between being interested in it, taking it very seriously, and enjoying learning about it, versus obsessing over it and having it cause you a lot of stress because you're so hyper-focused on every single detail. And also, I think that it's more important to know about the general, the greater picture when it comes to astrology rather than the exact specifics. I think that when people first get into astrology, it's really easy to kind of stress yourself out and get so excited about astrology that you need to know exactly what's happening in the sky at any given moment. And while I think it can be good to know that, that is where astrology can cross the line from being something you enjoy to something that and ultimately causes more stress than it's worth. So my next reasons for ways that astrology can be used in a negative way all really fit together. The first two I'm going to tackle as one, and that is using astrology to justify your shitty behavior and using astrology to validate your existence. I know that that sounds really mean, but I know people who are like, oh, I'm a Leo, that's just how I am. And doing the exact opposite of what I mentioned earlier, which is using astrology as a tool for introspection and self-development. I'm using Leo because I know a lot of Leos who do this. I'm guilty of this too. I can't tell you how many times I have said, I'm not being mean, I'm just honest. I'm a Sagittarius, I'm just really brutally honest. And I've had to learn, just because I'm honest and just because I think something doesn't mean that I have to say it. And some people just use astrology as a way to excuse their shitty behavior. And they are not interested in developing or learning or growing. They just want some excuse to continue to be mean to others or to keep themselves trapped in negative thought patterns. Just because you're a Pisces doesn't mean that you have to always be sad and emotional forever. Just because you're a Scorpio and you're secretive and mysterious doesn't mean that you don't have the opportunity to change and develop and learn to trust others. And then on the flip side, I think that people use astrology to validate themselves in a way that's not the most beneficial. I am all for self-confidence. I believe that self-confidence comes from within. I think that astrology can help highlight where our strengths are. For example, as a Sagittarius sun, I'm really flexible and adaptable. Like, I am really good at going with the flow. If plans change, I'm usually the one who's flaking on the plans. But if plans change, I'm happy to go with the flow. But I'm not using that like to validate myself. Like, I'm such a good person because I am so flexible and I'm the go along gal. I go with the flow. I'm so good for that. And so I think the flip side of using astrology to justify your shitty behavior is using astrology to boost your own ego. And, you know, I know people who read their horoscopes and they're like, I'm a Scorpio, I am so loyal. Like, you can't, like, there's no one out there who's more loyal than I am. Like, I am the most loyal because I'm a Scorpio. And I think that oftentimes these validations are based on very surface level descriptions of the signs. And then the issue comes with people not actually doing self-reflection. I could read like any horoscope column about Sagittarius and it'll say, oh, you're adventurous, you love to travel. And if I wasn't thinking critically, if I didn't know myself well, and if I wasn't self-aware, I could easily say, yeah, you're right, I do love to travel. I'm really cool because I do love to travel. And I think that a lot of people just stop at that point and they kind of use astrology to skip the actual work of getting to know themselves. I think this kind of falls under the umbrella of spiritual bypassing. But people who don't have a good sense of themselves, and especially in my circles, again, I'm 22, at the age I'm at, people are really trying to figure themselves out right now. And I think some people use astrology and they're like, as a way to skip doing the work, if that makes sense. They don't feel like they need to get to know themselves because they can simply use astrology. And it's like, all right, I've learned I'm a Virgo. So, you know, sorry I'm critical, I'm just a Virgo. But I'm so organized and I'm so great because I'm a Virgo. And literally just limiting themselves from the full expansiveness of who they are by just reading like cafe astrology and deciding their personality traits based on their astrological signs. I feel like I've kind of lost the plot a bit here, but this is also leading me to another point that sometimes people use astrology to skip over doing the work of getting to know themselves, to getting to know others, which does lead me to my final point. This is something that I was very guilty of and I've learned to work past. But when you first learn about astrology and you learn about the charts of the people around you, it is so fun to kind of listen to what people say and you're like, oh, that's your Cancer moon talking, or yeah, your Aries Mercury really just jumped out there. And I think that it's really important not to put people into boxes and to just listen to people and hear them, to hear what they have to say and see them as they are. I don't want this to come across as me saying that astrology puts people into boxes, because I definitely don't think it does inherently, but people can use it to put themselves or others into boxes. So as I was saying earlier, some people use astrology to validate themselves, excuse their shitty behavior, and by doing that, they're essentially putting themselves in a box. Like, my entire personality trait is this, and everything I do is because of my birth chart. And there are many debates that could be had about fate versus free will in astrology and correlation versus causation, which I think I'm going to make a whole different video on. I was going to talk about it in this one, but I think that might be too much. But in the same way that you don't want to put yourself in a box and you don't want others to put you in a box, don't put other people into boxes by reducing them to their birth chart placements. This has been a huge lesson for me personally, because I think it's, like I said, especially when you first are learning astrology, you want to look for it everywhere. By learning through experience, you want to see what these traits are like. Let's take moon signs, for example. Your moon is in one sign. That's one of 12. You have no idea what it's like to live in the mind of someone with the 11 other moon signs. And so when you're talking to someone and you're asking about their emotions, you might be kind of trying to put it together like, oh, they're a Pisces moon. They want to pretend that difficult situations don't exist. So instead of feeling them or diving deep into them, they tend to retreat from them. And so you might be sitting with someone and have the wheels turning in your head, but ultimately when you're doing that, you are not listening to them. You're not hearing them, and you're not seeing them for who they are. You're seeing them as a stereotype. And yes, you're learning astrology, but you're not truly connecting to that other person. And it's really just like when you're having a conversation, if you're listening to other person talk and you're just thinking about what you're gonna say next, you're not actually listening to them, you're just hearing them, if that makes sense. And it's the same thing, I think, with putting people into boxes with astrology. If you are simply listening to someone talk and trying to process their birth chart simultaneously, you're not actually listening to them. And I think that humans are so complex and so interesting, and I think that astrology can help point to some of the ways of why people act the way that they do, or how they feel, how they are as human beings, etc. But when connecting with other people in your life, don't put them into boxes and don't limit them to their personality traits, because people change, people develop, and if you're limiting your perception of someone to their birth chart, or truly your interpretation of their birth chart, you are limiting them, and you are ultimately like not really getting the picture of astrology by putting them into such narrow boxes and creating this like discrete, finite person, if that makes sense. Because like I said, people change, people grow, people develop, and on certain days and with certain timings, and if you study the patterns of astrology, you might have a better grasp of this, people can act very differently at different times based on what the planets are doing. So yes, I fully support using other people to help you learn about astrology, but don't use other people only to help you learn about astrology. And then again, don't put people into boxes of their placements. People can surprise you. People don't always fit into every single trait of any of their given placements, so don't put them into that box. To recap ways that I think astrology should not be used, I've said it about a million times, don't put people into boxes based on their placements. Don't use it to justify your shitty behavior or to validate yourself. Don't use astrology to kind of bypass the work of getting to know yourself. Figure out who you truly are. Chances are it probably does relate very well to your astrological placements, but don't use astrology to like put personality traits onto yourself. And then finally, don't obsess about the transits and astrological patterns if it gives you a lot of anxiety or stress. Ultimately, astrology is a tool. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad. And if you're using it in a way that causes you so much stress that you're not enjoying it, you're probably not using the tool right. There are ways to use it that are really beneficial. And tracking the patterns and transits can be so interesting and beneficial, and you can learn a lot, and like things just make a lot more sense, at least in my experience, when you can follow the patterns of the planets pretty well. But if it's causing you stress, don't do it. Alright, this has kind of turned into a bit of a rambly video, so I think I'm going to cut myself off here. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you guys stuck all the way through. And if you did enjoy this, please, again, give me a thumbs up, comment down below, subscribe so you can see more videos from me in the future. And until next time, bye guys.